Hi, it's Susan Young, Mindful Coaching. Today we're going to talk about comparing ourselves to others. What does it mean when we look at others' lives, when we look, whether it's social media, whether it's people in our own lives that we chat to? What does it mean when we take our insides and we put it on someone else's outsides? That's what it is. It sounds silly when we say it, but that's what we often do. So first, as always, to increase our awareness of when we do that, when we imagine someone else's life is how they appear on the outside, because we actually don't know. And so by holding simple truths, as when we notice that we're doing that, we hold a truth such as there is no such thing as a perfect life. It doesn't exist. And we know this is true. And then we come back to our insides. For sure, some people on this planet of almost 8 billion have lives that are easier. Most of us here today, and anyone who's listening, most of us have tremendous privilege, as we know, compared to folks who are living for 10 years, 150,000 in a refugee camp, or people undergoing war and torture and violence. But even people who live a completely different life than us, we still compare others who are, say, similar. And that's maybe more challenging. And when I was kind of researching and preparing for today, what I came up over and over again was the themes. It's about our ego, and we tell stories. Our ego tells stories about others. So we know the truth that we're all evolving at different rates and at different points, and that we don't see the whole picture. We have no idea what someone's life, what's gone on before, what's gone on afterward, whether the intersection is a brief moment, whether it's a longer reason, season, lifetime of a connection. So we don't know what other people are working through and what they're dealing with in private in their own souls. And if we add anyone who's had children, anyone who's ever had children or been close to children, we know that having children is very challenging. And so it can take us to the edge of patience and sanity, can't it? And raising kids is just hard. That's just how it is. So we can add layers, we can look at people, we can remember our own experiences. But when we feel inadequate, which is what fuels comparison, when we feel not good enough, and we turn and look at others and see how they're doing based on external perceptions, we can hear the kind of insane thinking around that, right? So when all of that falls away, when we sit deeply with our own soul and commune internally, I've been really practicing that eyes on the inside to kind of help me shift whenever I catch myself imagining someone else's life is easier, better. So, of course, we've been practicing together for a long time, and we work at consciously increasing our own inner peace and accepting ourselves where we're at. So how do we embrace ourselves with compassion and love and kindness? And even though we're a work in progress, some people might say something like we're a divine expression of life. Whatever you believe in terms of a higher power, a higher consciousness, a presence, if you believe in something like that, we can see our own energy manifesting as part of that presence, whether it's about looking at a tulip, whether it's about the billions and billions of stars that exist in this universe alone. What we can know is that when we compare ourselves, it's like one star comparing itself to another. It's silliness. So how do we keep attending when we slip away from our eyes on the inside on our own soul's journey? Again, dropping the stories about ourselves and about others. bringing ourselves more often to the personal and subjective experience of being tender and awake to your own internal, and tuning into those around us that we're close. So if we become more conscious, which I know all of us listening to this are working on, of the beliefs and thoughts, the emotions and stories, the actions that we take, we keep dropping them and coming back to our own present moment, then that gives us out of the story. It takes us out of the story. They're better, they're different, they don't have that. And we can keep turning back to compassion for ourselves, for the part of our blustery ego that wants to be better or wants to kind of do something different. My dear friend Andy recently went on a canoe trip, and his close friend, who was the bridge to 3 other men, they're all in their 70s, early 70s. He's a pretty radical thinker, and he said sometimes it was like being with boys in the grade 8 locker room. He was a teacher for many years, because there was that sense of, look at me, look at me. And there was, he also experienced sexism and misogyny and lack of awareness of that. And he has a high conscious awareness of those kinds of things. And so he kept having to pull himself out of, he could feel his own need to bluster and attack and show them how you couldn't be sexist or misogynist or those things, right? And he, for sure, he challenged here and there and brought things up, but sometimes he chose to keep his mouth quiet and feel, oh, is this a betrayal of all the women in my life, my partner, my sister? We are close, like sister and brother. So that seems to me like a great practice, to choose how we speak up for something that we value, and how to learn how to hold compassion for ourselves and others when our values are different. To keep an open mind. So our story about ourselves is often wrapped up in those things. And so the very nature of our conscious awareness is to know what is happening to ourselves at the very moment. And before, I used to think that me speaking up with my values when others were, say, sexist, and that I would often become assertive at the least, often aggressive, self-righteous, with having to tell others why they were wrong about that. And I would back it up because, of course, I studied in my master's, that was part feminist, postmodernism, and I would barrel over people with my articulate values and my capacity to speak to this, without choosing skillfully when to speak up and when not, and without knowing how to tolerate differences, and without seeing ways in myself where I was and still have places where I am trapped in my ego and the stories. So we keep coming back to our accepting ourselves with a deep humility, accepting our imperfection, our humanness. And anyone, we've said this over and over, who isn't there, who doesn't says, I'm not doing like my whole life or whatever, we just know it's not true. I'll finish this with, I watched on Netflix the other night, Captain Fantastic with Viggo Mortensen, anyone who hasn't seen it. It's a very interesting alternative social, it's a fictionalized account, but boy, it's skillfully done. And he comes to it with great humility, even though he has big stories with his 6 children living in the woods and a wife who dies of mental illness, and her parents, self-righteousness around that he caused her death when she kills herself. So it's a bit of a spoiler alert, but it's really, if there's a moment where you see that he has to let go of his ideals and his values of raising these young children so that they can do so much in the world, and they're so smart, but he has to let go of it. And I love Viggo Mortensen. I've seen him live at TIFF, and I've seen his films, and I think he's just brilliant. He brings integrity to the screen, in my opinion. So that's to see someone drop their, story and ego around what is right and what is true, that it's a beautiful example. So I'll finish now, and we'll pause for questions before we come back to explore the meditation.